When a man truly loves you, you might expect him to constantly chase you, reassure you, and show you his affection in loud and obvious ways. But love, real, rooted, and mature love, doesn't always look the way we want it to. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it steps back. And sometimes it even appears like he's ignoring you. But don't be fooled by what seems like emotional distance. When a man pulls back, it may be the exact moment that he's falling deeper in love. Not weaker, stronger. You see, a man who is emotionally mature and deeply connected to you doesn't always show that love through constant pursuit. He might retreat into silence not because he doesn't care, but because he's overwhelmed by how much he does. This kind of man needs space to process what he's feeling. Unlike immature love, which clings and suffocates, mature love takes its time. It doesn't panic. It doesn't beg for validation. It reflects. When he starts pulling away, your mind might race. Did I do something wrong? Did he lose interest? But here's the truth most don't realize. When a man begins to love you deeply, he often finds himself in unfamiliar territory. He feels vulnerable, exposed, and instead of acting needy or overcompensating, he pulls back to regain control over those intense emotions. It's his way of testing both his own heart and the strength of the bond you share. It's almost like a reset button, not to escape from you, but to check in with himself. A man in love isn't just falling for you, he's falling into himself too. He needs to understand how this new emotional reality is changing him. So instead of flooding you with messages or obsessing over you like immature love does, he takes the silent route. And that silence isn't empty, it's full of thought, full of emotion, full of conflict. He is trying to make sure he's falling for you intentionally, not just emotionally. But here's where most women make the mistake. They interpret that silence as disinterest. They panic. They chase, they demand answers, but by doing that, you break the very energy that made him fall in love with you in the first place. Your stillness, your power, your mystery. See, love grows in quiet soil. It doesn't always bloom under constant pressure or attention. Sometimes, the more still you remain, the more he feels your presence. The more you let him breathe, the more he realizes that you're the only one he wants to breathe next to. And when you don't chase, when you allow him his space, something magical happens. You stay on his mind. He starts missing your energy, not your words or your attention, but your essence, and that essence becomes louder in your absence than it ever was in your presence. That's what love really is. When someone can feel you, even when you're not there. When someone starts to ache for your energy because you're not giving it freely anymore. He may go quiet for days. He may act distant. He may ignore your texts. But deep inside, he's watching. He's testing, not testing you to hurt you, but testing the bond. Is it real? Is it worth diving deeper into? Is it worth surrendering his emotional control for? And the answer often comes not from what you do, but what you don't. You don't beg, you don't react, you don't collapse into emotional chaos. You stand still in your power, knowing that if this love is real, it will find its way back to you. Not because you chased it, but because you became the kind of woman who's worth chasing. When he pulls back, let him. When he goes silent, trust that the silence is saying more than words ever could. And when he ignores you, know that sometimes it's the most vulnerable confession a man can make, because loving you terrifies him more than losing you. And in that space, in that silence, you'll find your real strength, not in reacting, but in understanding. Not in chasing, but in trusting. trusting that love, when it's real, doesn't vanish when ignored. It reveals itself more clearly, because the man who truly loves you will always come back, not to the woman who chased him, but to the woman who waited in stillness, knowing her worth. There's something deeply powerful about emotional distance, something that speaks louder than words, louder than affection, louder than constant validation. When you stop chasing, when you withdraw your energy and go silent, not out of spite, but from inner strength, you awaken something in him that no words ever could. You stir a deep and primal emotion that begins to whisper inside his mind. Where did she go? Why do I feel this way now that she's gone silent? Most people don't understand how attraction works on a subconscious level. They think love is built only through closeness, through constant interaction, through repeated affirmations. But in reality, attraction is also built in space. Longing is born in distance, and desire isn't sustained by comfort. It's sustained by contrast. That's why ignoring or stepping back emotionally often speaks louder than attention. When a man feels your presence all the time, when you're constantly available, constantly giving, constantly responding, he doesn't have the space to feel your absence. And if he doesn't feel your absence, he doesn't recognize your value, not because he's ungrateful, not because he doesn't care, but because the human mind becomes blind to what's always there. It stops seeing the extraordinary in the familiar. That's why sometimes, when you stop showing up so fully, when you turn inward, he begins to feel something he didn't expect. Hunger. He starts to feel a shift. He can't explain it. He might not even admit it. But he begins to notice the silence. Not the silence of anger or punishment, but the kind that creates curiosity, the kind that forces him to look inward and ask himself, why am I thinking about her more now? Why do I feel this void? That's what silence does. It echoes, and the more he sits with it, the louder it becomes. When you stop chasing, you reclaim your power. That's when your energy stops pouring out and starts pulling in. You're no longer seeking, you're radiating, and that shift from seeker to center is what triggers something powerful inside him. Men are instinctively drawn to challenge, to pursuit, to the feeling of earning something they could lose. The moment he realizes that you're not waiting at the door, that you're not endlessly available, that you've stopped sending the emotional signals he's used to receiving from you, that's when he starts to feel the weight of your absence. And here's the beauty of it. You're not manipulating. You're not playing games. You're simply pulling your energy back to yourself, not to punish, but to protect. You're allowing space for him to recognize what your presence truly meant. And in that space, his mind begins to wander. His emotions begin to rise. The woman who was once there, comforting, loving, giving, is now quiet. And in that silence, he begins to feel the storm inside. You may have thought that chasing was the only way to prove your love, that being available and present all the time would bring him closer. But in reality, it often creates emotional laziness. He doesn't have to try. He doesn't have to think. He doesn't have to reach, but the moment you become scarce, truly scarce, he starts to search, not just for you, but for the feeling you brought into his life. He may scroll through your pictures, wondering what you're thinking. He might check your stories, trying to catch a glimpse of your emotional state. He might even pretend he doesn't care, ignore you right back, but inside he's battling himself. Because part of him wants to remain in control, but another part is panicking, realizing that he's losing access to something rare. It's that very tension that ignites pursuit, not because you pushed him, but because you pulled away. He starts to question his own behavior. He replays past moments in his mind. He begins to wonder if you've moved on. If someone else is getting the attention he once took for granted. And just like that, the shift begins. The man who was once passive begins to take action, not because you begged for it, but because you stopped giving him what he didn't earn. This is not about manipulation. This is about alignment. When you pull back, you align with your worth. You tell the universe and him that your energy is sacred, that it's not freely given to anyone who doesn't appreciate it. That realization doesn't push him away. It pulls him in, because now he sees you differently, not as someone always chasing, but as someone worth chasing. And when he comes running, he's no longer doing it out of comfort. He's doing it out of craving. He's doing it because he's seen what life feels like without your energy. And he doesn't want to feel that again. Sometimes silence is the most powerful sound a woman can make. It says, I see my worth, I protect my peace, and I no longer beg for love that should have been given freely. And it's in that silence, in that distance, that you'll see the truth. Those who value your presence will feel your absence. There is something deeply irresistible about a woman who doesn't give all of herself away, not because she's cold, not because she's distant, but because she understands the value of emotional mystery. When a woman becomes a mystery, she becomes unforgettable. And when a man encounters that kind of energy, it lingers in his mind long after the moment has passed. You see, we're conditioned to believe that love means openness, complete transparency, always expressing, always explaining. But in reality, emotional mystery is not about hiding. It's about holding a part of yourself back, not in fear, but in wisdom. Because what is rare is respected, and what is mysterious becomes magnetic. When a man feels like he already has all of you, there's nothing left to discover. But when you keep a quiet part of yourself sacred, when you remain calm, composed, and slightly unpredictable, he's drawn to you in a way he can't explain. Mystery isn't about pretending. It's about not always being emotionally predictable. It's about being a little harder to read, a little quieter in your reactions, and a little more selective in what you share. That emotional pause, that self-possession, that restraint, it leaves him thinking, and that thinking creates obsession. It creates a loop in his mind that keeps replaying conversations, moments, looks, silences. He begins to study you, to wonder, and in wondering he falls deeper. Men are naturally wired to solve problems, to figure things out. When you're emotionally mysterious, you trigger that instinct. You become his puzzle, not in a way that's confusing or manipulative, but in a way that stimulates his emotional intelligence. He doesn't just want to be near you, he wants to understand you. And once he wants to understand you, the game changes. Because now he's no longer chasing attention, he's chasing connection. But that connection has to be earned. And emotional mystery is how you filter the real from the shallow. The wrong man will be frustrated by your mystery. He will demand clarity, answers, constant access. But the right man, he will be enchanted. He will lean in. He will watch your silences like poetry, listen to your pauses like they're part of a song, because he knows that what you're not saying is just as powerful as what you are. Mystery is not silence out of fear. It's silence with presence. It's energy that speaks without needing to explain itself. When you carry yourself like this, when you allow him to feel your depth without spilling it all out. You create space for desire to grow, for curiosity to bloom, and when a man is curious, he's emotionally engaged. He's not just reacting, he's thinking, wondering, feeling. He's invested. You become unforgettable not by giving everything, but by giving selectively. He begins to ask himself, who is she when I'm not around? What is she thinking when she goes quiet? Why can't I stop thinking about her? That's what mystery does. It roots itself in his subconscious. He can't shake it. He starts to see you in everything, hear your voice in the silence, feel your absence in the most unexpected moments. And here's the part most people overlook. When you create mystery, you also create respect, because you're not seeking validation. You're not trying to convince anyone of your worth. You're grounded in it, and that grounded energy is what makes you stand out. You're not emotionally all over the place. You're not begging for connection. You're centered, and that calm, quiet confidence. It's magnetic. When you don't explain every emotion, when you don't give away your reactions, when you don't make your love easily accessible, you stop being an option and start being a presence. A woman like that is rare, and rarity creates value. You don't need to tell him you've pulled back. He will feel it. You don't need to prove that you're different. He will realize it. And once he sees that you're not like the others, always chasing, always exposing, always emotionally naked, he will start to wonder, what is it about her? And in that wondering, he begins the journey of pursuit. Not just physical pursuit, but emotional pursuit. And that kind of pursuit is what builds real connection. He doesn't come running because you asked him to. He comes running because the mystery of your energy, your restraint, your silence, it pulled him in. And now he wants to know everything you haven't said. Let him wonder, let him chase the quiet parts of you. Because what a man works for, he cherishes. And when he has to search your soul instead of scrolling through your feelings, he won't just love you, he'll respect you. And once that happens, you'll never have to chase again. You'll watch him come running. Sometimes, when a man loves you, the way he expresses it doesn't look like what you imagined. It doesn't always come wrapped in constant attention, romantic words, or daily affirmations. Sometimes it shows up in the form of distance. He may seem like he's pulling away. He may go quiet. Or he might not respond the way you want him to. And you begin to wonder, does he still care? Is he losing interest? Is this love fading? But what many people don't realize is that when a man truly respects and values a woman, he doesn't want to make a move based on impulse or desperation. He needs time to process, to think, to reflect on his feelings. So yes, sometimes he ignores not to hurt you, not because he's disrespecting you, but because he deeply respects what you represent in his life. His silence, his distance, can sometimes be the clearest sign that he's working through the weight of what he feels. In today's world, we're taught that love has to be loud to be real, that it has to show up every day in obvious forms. But real love doesn't always work like that. Real love, especially from a man who takes emotions seriously, can be quiet, reserved, thoughtful, and sometimes that quietness looks like emotional withdrawal. But that withdrawal is his way of gaining clarity. He doesn't want to fake it. He doesn't want to make promises he's not ready to keep. So instead of feeding you empty words, he steps back because your presence means too much for him to mishandle. That's something powerful to understand. A man who truly respects you doesn't want to ruin what he feels. He doesn't want to speak from a place of confusion or act out of pressure. So he pulls away, not to teach you a lesson, but to make sure his next move comes from certainty. In that silence, he's asking himself, am I ready? Can I give her what she deserves? He might not say those words aloud, but he's thinking them. And during this time, the worst thing you can do is chase him for answers. Because when you chase, you interrupt his emotional process. You pull him out of that introspective state and into a reactive one. That's when mistakes are made. That's when confusion grows. But if you allow him that space, that silence, something shifts. He begins to feel safe enough to explore his emotions without fear of being judged, without pressure, without chaos. Love without respect is unstable. It's surface level. But love that's rooted in respect requires time and distance to fully bloom. He might ignore you not because he's done, but because he's just beginning to understand what you mean to him. And that understanding can only come when there's silence, when there's space to hear his own heart. A man who ignores you out of respect is not turning away from you. He's turning inward. He's searching for a way to honor what he feels. And yes, that silence can be painful. That distance can trigger your fears. But if you react emotionally by demanding answers, over-explaining your worth, or trying to prove your love, you step out of your power. You shift from sacred to desperate. And desperation never attracts what you truly deserve. When you stand still in that moment and say nothing, when you hold your ground and trust the process, you mirror that same respect back to him. You're telling him, I don't need constant validation to know who I am. That energy is powerful. It doesn't beg. It doesn't panic. It knows. The truth is, men aren't always emotionally expressive in the ways we wish. But when a man respects you deeply, you'll see it in his restraint. He won't use your emotions for his ego. He won't try to keep you on a leash. He won't breadcrumb you for attention. Instead, he will distance himself when he's unsure, because he doesn't want to disrespect your time, your heart, or your energy. That kind of man is rare. And when you recognize this pattern, not as rejection, but as emotional responsibility, you shift from being reactive to being wise. You no longer chase what's already circling back to you. You understand that love isn't always loud, but it's still real. You learn to respect silence, because you know that in silence, clarity grows. And eventually, when that clarity comes, so will he. Not confused, not half-hearted, but ready to match the depth you held, ready to give what he was preparing within himself during that quiet space. Sometimes love sounds like nothing at all. Sometimes the greatest respect a man can show is by stepping back, not because he's letting go, but because he's choosing to return with intention. And when that happens, you won't need to chase. There's a moment in every connection where something changes, a moment where silence replaces conversation, where distance replaces warmth, and where the energy between two people becomes quiet. And in that quiet, something happens, especially to a man who once felt emotionally in control. When you pull back, when you don't react, when you don't explain, you create a shift in his world that he cannot ignore. At first, he may pretend like he's unaffected. He may act like he's fine, like nothing has changed. But deep inside, that silence is speaking to him louder than any words ever could. That's the moment where pursuit begins. You see, we often assume that we need to do something to make someone love us more. We think if we explain ourselves better, reach out more, or give them more access to our emotions, they'll understand our worth. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more available you are, the less visible you become. He doesn't have the space to feel your absence. And without that space, there's no longing, no realization, no desire to pursue. But when you step back with grace, not out of spite, but with strength, something inside him wakes up. He begins to notice what's missing, not your words, not your attention, but your energy, the warmth you used to carry, the lightness you used to bring into his life. The emotional safety he once had full access to suddenly, it's gone. And that absence creates an ache, a quiet discomfort he didn't expect, a void he didn't know he'd feel. At first he may distract himself, he might dive into work, he might keep himself busy, he might even talk to others. But nothing feels the same, because once a man has tasted the depth of a woman who is emotionally mature, who gives from her heart but also knows how to pull back when her energy is not respected, everything else begins to feel shallow. This is when the shift begins. Slowly, quietly, he starts to reflect. The memories become louder. He replays conversations in his mind. He starts checking your social media, not for updates, but for presence. Is she still thinking about me? Is she waiting for me to come back? Has she moved on? And in those silent questions, he starts to come alive emotionally. He starts to feel everything he pushed down. Your absence doesn't just make him miss you. It makes him realize what he had. And more importantly, what he could lose. That's when the pursuit begins, not the surface-level pursuit, the real one. The kind that comes from clarity, not convenience. The kind that's driven by emotion, not ego. He no longer sees you as someone who's always available. He sees you as someone with boundaries, with self-respect, with a presence that needs to be earned. And earning you becomes the mission. He may start with subtle moves, a message, a like, a check-in, not because he's unsure, but because he's trying to gauge if the door is still open, if your heart is still accessible. And here's the key. This is not the moment to give everything back. This is the moment to remain in your stillness, because when you don't immediately reward his return, you reinforce your value. You show him that what you offer isn't casual, it's sacred. That access to your heart is not a given, it's a privilege. The man who once felt like he could take you for granted is now experiencing something he didn't expect. Emotional imbalance. He's no longer in control of the dynamic. And instead of chasing power, he starts chasing presence. Your presence, your approval, your energy, because now he feels what he couldn't see before. Men don't always process emotions in the moment. Sometimes they need to lose access to truly feel. Sometimes they need silence to hear what your presence once provided. Sometimes they need to watch you stop trying so they can start trying. Not because they're cruel or heartless, but because they're human. And sometimes humans need contrast to feel clarity. Let him come to that realization on his own. Don't speed it up. Don't try to control it. Just stay rooted in your stillness, knowing that your silence is working harder than any words ever could. When he does come back, and he will if the connection was real, he'll come back not because he wants control, but because he finally understands what your presence meant. He'll come back not to waste your time, but to honor it, to prove that the distance made him grow and the silence made him see. Because the pursuit doesn't begin when you keep giving. It begins when you gracefully stop, when you stop explaining. Stop chasing, stop trying to remind him who you are. That's when you let him remember, and in that remembering, he will feel everything. He will come to you not for attention, but for redemption. and you won't need to do anything at all, because your silence already spoke the truth. There comes a moment in your life where you realize that love doesn't mean overextending yourself. It doesn't mean proving your worth over and over. It doesn't mean trying to hold someone close by giving all your time, all your attention, all your emotional energy. In fact, the deepest shift happens when you finally understand the power of detachment. Not the kind that's bitter or closed off, but the kind that comes from knowing your value so deeply, you no longer feel the need to fight for a space in someone's life. When you stop chasing, when you stop overgiving, something powerful happens not just in him, but in you. You begin to reclaim your emotional energy, you begin to protect your peace, and instead of constantly managing someone else's behavior, you redirect all that energy inward, back to yourself. That's the beginning of true self-worth, the moment where you say, I don't need to be loud to be valuable. I don't need to chase to be loved. When you detach, it doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop attaching your value to someone else's presence. It means you no longer need them to validate what you already know. You are enough. You are powerful. You are worthy of love that flows toward you, not one that you have to beg for. And here's the part that surprises most people. When you stop reaching out, stop over-explaining, stop trying to fix what's not flowing naturally, that's the very moment they begin to feel your absence, because your energy, your availability, your emotional presence, it's no longer being handed out freely. That space creates awareness, that space creates desire. They start to think about you, wonder about you. Feel the difference between your presence and your silence. But here's the deeper truth. It doesn't even matter whether they come running or not. Because when you detach, the focus shifts. The goal is no longer to make someone return. The goal is to return to yourself. And when you do that, when you're no longer emotionally tangled in someone else's inconsistency, you become unshakable. You'll notice your confidence rise again. You'll feel lighter. You'll start laughing more, sleeping better, breathing easier. Because detachment isn't just about them. It's about you taking your power back. You're no longer acting out of fear or scarcity. You're acting out of self-respect, and that energy, it's magnetic. When you're in your power, you don't react to every text. You don't beg for closure. You don't explain why you deserve to be treated better. You simply embody it. And in that embodiment, the dynamic changes. They feel it, they sense it. They may not be able to articulate it, but they feel the shift. The woman who once chased them is now unreachable, not because she's hiding, but because she's healed. And from that place, love begins to look different. You're no longer interested in being chosen. You're interested in being met, fully, emotionally, spiritually. You're no longer interested in games. You're interested in alignment. And you're no longer afraid of letting someone go. Because now you know, anything meant for you won't require you to abandon yourself to keep it. That's what emotional detachment gives you. Clarity, strength, freedom. You stop trying to control how others feel about you and focus on how you feel about yourself. And that quiet power, that grounded presence, it becomes impossible to ignore. Let others play the game of pulling away to get attention. Let them test your patience, but you don't need to play, you just need to be. And the more you stay in that place, the more everything around you starts to shift. You'll begin to notice who comes back not because you chased them, but because your energy called them. You'll see who shows up, not because you demanded it, but because you created space. And those who truly feel your value, they will come running, not to win, not to control, but to join you. and you won't need to chase.